Hello, and welcome to Frontiers in Health and Happiness, the official podcast of the Lee Kum-Sheung Center for Health and Happiness at the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health. My name is Ayla Fudala, Center Communications Coordinator, and I'll be asking experts how to live a healthy, happy life. As loneliness and social media use have both risen, many have wondered if the two are connected. Does social media use increase loneliness or diminish it? I'll be exploring that question today with Dr. Jeffrey Hall, an expert in the intersection of social media and loneliness. Dr. Hall is a professor of communication studies at the University of Kansas. He served as the 2023-24 Rebooting Social Media Visiting Scholar at the Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society at the Harvard Law School. Okay, so my first question is, has the rise of social media created the loneliness epidemic?
So overwhelmingly, the research suggests that it has not, that the loneliness epidemic, if we want to call it that, preceded the rise of social and mobile media. So specifically, if we look at the rise of loneliness that we're seeing by young adults specifically, that started happening before social and mobile media. The question of whether or not loneliness is specifically related to social media is it has a very weak association, and by some measures has no association whatsoever. So it's very unlikely that loneliness was created, certainly not at the epidemic level, by social and mobile media.
Does social media satisfy the need to belong?
At kind of a basic level, I would say that probably not. In the broader sense of the need to belong being something that it exists as your whole life, as a part of human thriving, social media probably is not a major factor in being able to get your needs satisfied on connection specifically. Something important to keep in mind is that for certain practices of social media use, there are ways on momentary levels or daily levels for feeling more connected, feeling inspired by people, feeling part of a broader community. And those things are very important, especially for people who need a sense of community or feeling isolated. However, we want to be careful about thinking that loneliness, that social media plays an enormous role in either loneliness or in connection. It's probably a minor player at a much bigger stage.
Is it possible for social media to help people who are very isolated and lonely?
I think it can. The stories that I think that we can see that make a big difference is when people are geographically isolated from people either they love and care about, or if they're trying to find their identity, explore who they are, and they geographically don't have people around them who they feel as if they can connect with or understand. Social media can play a role in bridging those divides in a very palpable sense. This doesn't mean necessarily that everyone who goes online or goes on social media are able to find that community. It doesn't mean that social media are perfectly equipped or well-equipped even to create that sense of connection. I certainly think that the rise of TikTok is not conducive to more social interaction or social connectedness. So there's a lot of possibilities where it could contribute to a sense of connection, but there's a lot of ways in which that it's unlikely to make a big difference in the broader scheme.
Can social media be harmful to people? And if so, any demographics in particular?
I think there's no question that social media has a lot of possibility for harm to be carried through. We can look at issues around misinformation, hate speech. There are plenty of places in which that social media can be a source of negative or incorrect or inaccurate information. I think it's also worthwhile to point out that there's a lot of functions that social media have which are similar to what we might see associated with negative associations with things around television or advertising, such as women's body image or having a distorted sense of body satisfaction. So social media, in as much that it's an extension of old media, and old media have always played a role in perpetuating heterosexist attitudes and also, of course, sexist attitudes, we can see that social media can also be a source of creating those same dynamics. But I think a more important question is are social media uniquely creating those dynamics? Does it uniquely cause these sorts of things? I think it's a much more complicated answer because there's a lot of good evidence that broadcast news, for example, also propagates information that's inaccurate, spreads misinformation. We also know that there are a lot of ways in which to get content online that is not social media that is just plain false. So in some sense, whether social media is uniquely contributing to this ecosystem is hard to say. But can it be used in ways which are harmful or hurtful to others? No question.
At the University of Kansas, you direct the Relationships and Technology Lab. Can you tell me more about that and how it relates to loneliness and social connection?
Yeah, so our lab really looks at questions that have to do with this idea of offline-online communication. I tend to be a little different than a lot of researchers that are either studying interpersonal communication or researchers that are studying social media, in that I'm very interested in the ways that our offline and online lives overlap, how they complement each other, how they substitute for one another or displace one another. So I'm very fascinated by the process that social media is part of our broader kind of social ecology in which that we live. So the questions that the Relationship and Technology Lab pursue are very much questions that are around my theory, that communicate bond belong theory, around questions of displacement and social displacement, around digital stress is another area that I spend time on. But all of it is a place in which that my graduate students and I can thrive and work together on projects that we care about.
Can you tell me about your work at the Harvard Law School, where you served as a visiting scholar at the Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society? What is the Berkman Klein Center all about, and what did you do there?
The Berkman Klein Center, I got to be here in the very first week, which was their 25th anniversary. So they have been around for 25 years, studying issues around internet and society, around content moderation, around open access, around artificial intelligence, issues around privacy and moderation. They have been a major player for a very long time in contributing to studies of internet technology policy and broader questions about kind of social governance and social media world. So my work there for the last year, and this is my last week here in Boston and at Harvard, it's been a really great year, was really exploring an idea very specifically about whether or not there are positive ways to use social media. So that was my project that I came here to explore. And I spent a lot of this year sort of fleshing out these ideas, writing papers, engaging with other scholars to understand those things.
And are there positive ways to use social media?
Absolutely. So in my book, Relating Through Technology, I kind of end with 4 suggestions about how we can use social media in more positive ways. The first is to tighten the circle. The concept there is to talk and spend time with the people who we love and care about the most. Keep in touch with your friends, reach out to your family, make sure you're prioritizing the way that you spend time, your free time, your leisure time, to connect with one another. The second thing is to strengthen the signal. So whilst following someone on social media or attending to what they're posting on social media is good, following group chats is a little bit better. So a small group communication, like a group of friends or otherwise talking together, is a little better. One-on-one text is a little better. Video chat's a little better than that. Phone calls are a little better than that. And face-to-face interaction is the best.
When you say better, does that mean better for promoting social connection, promoting well-being, staving off loneliness?
Yeah, I mean, and one thing is the question of loneliness makes it a little trickier. In the case of face-to-face interaction, there's very good evidence that face-to-face interaction matters for mitigating loneliness. When it comes to promoting connection, I think all of these things play a small role, and they go up a ladder of higher and higher levels of connection. You know, some have argued that that's due to the fact that we tend to restrict our phone calls with people who we love and care about. It's not often people are making phone calls to strangers. That makes sense. And that texting, you know, it tends to have a greater effect in social media, partly because it's actually communication that's back and forth between individuals rather than mass broadcast of information to a large group of people. But the broader kind of way that I like to think of it is that when you want to promote connection, you can think of it as improving the quality of your kind of daily affirmations, your micro connections that you can build through mediated practice.
Thank you. Your 2020 book, Relating Through Technology, received 2 top book awards from the National Communication Association. What are the major points that you hope readers will take away from the book?
That is a really good question. Let's see if I can remember what would be the best way to summarize that book in a concise sort of way. You know what? I think the best way to explain this is that Relating Through Technology is trying to integrate 2 sort of spheres of research that I'm part of. One is in interpersonal communication, which is one of the top book awards came from that division. And the other one is human communication and technology. And so the two of these are brought together in the book by trying to say that our mediated practices are part of our offline relationships with each other, that our mediated practices play a role in facilitating relationship development and online dating and all the ways in which that we be connected to each other. So each one of the chapters sorts of like fleshes out different parts of what it means to be connected through technology, to how to experience it. It also puts aside some of the most alarmist rhetoric about what it means to use social media, explores the idea of digital stress, which is to not give our mediated practices a pass, but to understand them in relation to our coping mechanisms. It looks at digital displacement, so the idea, are we losing face-to-face connection because of social media? So it tries to cover a lot of the major questions and controversies around whether or not this offline-online divide is beneficial to individuals or if it's harmful.
You have a new book coming out next year with Yale University Press, titled The Social Biome. What should readers expect?
I am so excited to be sharing this book next year with my co-author, Andy Morella, who has been just a terrific friend and collaborator for all of these years. He actually and I coined the concept, the social biome, in a paper we did in 2020. And the idea here is that we are part of a social system that we both create and generate through our communication actions, our way that we talk to one another, kind of relationships that we have, but also that there are social pressures upon us that change and constrain the way that we can communicate. It has to do with our communities, the kind of obligations that we have to one another, our workplace. So the idea is the social biome is this idea that we are both part of our social system and we are responding to our social system. And through that, we actually develop social health. So the whole concept of the book is ways to sort of promote social health and understand our social health while really embracing the idea that it's very difficult to do so, that these are inherent challenges to communication and relationship building that we have to be sensitive to understand why people don't take the time to develop the relationships with each other.
What is digital thriving?
Digital thriving is the idea that we can choose to use and develop patterns of use of mobile and social media in ways that will actually lead us to live a more connected and more, kind of meaningful existence. And digital thriving really requires us to take ownership over our actions and how we treat one another in ways that allow us to use those tools to their full potential. So digital thriving is not something that's likely to be able to be achieved easily. And for some folks, it may not be able to be achieved at all, because in some ways your digital thriving is contingent on having meaningful and close relationships with other people that you can communicate with and you can reach out for. On the other hand, there's always the possibility of traversing space and geographic constraints to make new relationships, to date, to fall in love, and to actually contribute to your broader sense of well-being.
When you feel lonely, what do you do?
It's always good to ask researchers what themselves, how they use their own research to inform their practices. One of the things I've come to appreciate is we've done a long way in discussing the importance that we need to destigmatize loneliness. If you feel like you're lonely, to destigmatize admitting that you're lonely. And I think that's important. But I might go one step further. I actually think that the feeling of loneliness means you have a functional social system. It means your body is working with you to try to prompt you to take action, to do something about that loneliness. In some ways, we want to thank ourselves, our brain and our bodies for alerting us that this is something that we need to be working on, because social relationships are just so important for our long-term health and well-being, our rates of mortality and morbidity. So for myself, because I study these things, when I feel lonely or disconnected, a lot of times I'm reminded to kind of engage in the things that I know to be useful practices. I send short messages to my friends and say, I miss you or I'm thinking of you. It's been a long time since we talked. I try to make plans. So I reach out to my friends who live in the Kansas area and I say, hey, let's all get together for dinner again. It's been months since the last time we saw each other. I email, somebody from work and say, hey, do you have time on, later this week to have lunch? I make plans. I respond in the moment. And I think sort of about my long-term sense of connection when I feel lonely, because I understand that although those things may not make me feel less lonely right now, they're likely to keep me at a higher state of connection throughout my days and throughout my months and weeks. And so I like to thank my earlier self for having made those plans, that I get to enjoy them, but they only get made if I take those steps.
In your work, you've compared loneliness to hunger and mentioned something called social snacking. Can you speak more about that?
Yeah, the social snacking idea comes from the concept that there are little forms of communication that we can ingest that remind us of our social connectedness without actually engaging in social behavior, like an interpersonal interaction, for example. The earliest studies on social snacking, which I just loved, were the idea that you can look at pictures of your friends and family, you can kind of meditate on the feelings that you have of connection to people that you love, and that those little reminders that you are connected can actually stave off feelings of ostracism or feeling like you're excluded from others. But I use the social snacking metaphor one step farther, which is to suggest that social media may be a form of social snacking. That if your entire diet consists of snacks, you're probably not going to be fully nourished. But the snacks themselves are just ways in which that we can temporarily make up for a feeling of feeling disconnected. And turning on, social media to see the people, what's going on with the people that we care about, or learning news about the things that we're interested in, is a way of finding that little snack in a moment when we may not have the connection that we'd like to have.
I've heard people compare social media to junk food.
I don't think that that's wrong. I mean, I think that it's not wrong to compare it to junk food. But I learned something very important from colleagues who study nutrition in the debate related to hyperpalatable foods. So the argument of hyperpalatable food says, well, we do not want to eat chips or soda or snacks or things that are really super delicious, high in fat, high in sugar, high in salt. They're not good for you in the long run. But one of the things that I thought was really insightful was it said that, on the other hand, hyperpalatable foods may be the only food that somebody has. Maybe they live in a food desert. Maybe they can't afford fresh fruits and vegetables because they're very expensive. Maybe the only types of foods that they can be able to have in their home are ones that don't decompose and don't require refrigeration. And I think that we should have sensitivity to the idea that hyperpalatable foods, are not ideal, but they may be all that someone's got. So in some sense, I don't disagree that social media could be seen as kind of a snack. A not totally healthy thing to be having if it's your only part of your diet. But the value of that snack for you is highly dependent on what you already have available to you. So if you're a person with lots of social connection, you have a lot of relationships, probably social media is not going to really matter that much. That snack's not going to hurt you. But if you're somebody who really needs to find human connection, you really need to deeply be able to find someone in your life that can help you feel connected, social media probably alone is not going to get you there, but it's better than nothing.
In the past, you've said that loneliness is self-perpetuating. Can you please explain further?
So researchers who are much, much better than me, people like John Cacioppo, who really, not only literally wrote the book on loneliness, but is really was a major force in understanding its impact, really made arguments to say that there are a whole bunch of things that lonely people do which discount their ability to be more social in the future. They tend to think that they have less to offer. They turn down opportunities to interact with other people. They show nonverbal signs to the people around them that they don't want to be bothered. They don't want to be invited. They do a lot of things that actually make it difficult for them to be able to re-engage socially with others. And Cacioppo, amongst others from an evolutionary model, suggests that this is actually designed to be able to further protect a person from harm. So in some ways, by detecting ostracism in a deep sense in which that they're not welcome, highly lonely people also engage in behaviors to further protect themselves from harm, but that also further pulls them away from the people who might help them feel reconnected. So what's really unfortunate about loneliness is that it's really hard to change the behavior when your perceptual mechanisms are telling you you really shouldn't or you're not worth it.
If you ran the U.S. government, what policy changes around social media companies would you make?
That's a great question. So one of the benefits of being at the Berkman Klein Center over the years, there's been so much robust conversation about what's the role of governance. The Berkman Klein Center has opened my eyes to how important it is that we think big about what possibly could be done. And there are three changes that I think that might make an effect on making social media an ally rather than a potential obstacle to us getting our social needs met. And the three are these. The first is I think we need more competition. What I've really learned by watching social media companies change over the years is that some of the ways that we would still love to be using social media companies change and no longer let us use them anymore that way. They change their interface. They change their way that they present information. They change their feed. They change all kinds of things, and we can't change it back. So without competition, then we really don't have a lot of options that might better promote social connection. And there are certainly ways to imagine social connection as something that people are trying to use social media to accomplish. There's good reason to believe that people are pulling away from social networking sites and are actually moving to small group chats to have the same kind of interaction they used to have, but they're just having it in private. That means there's a high demand out there for people to have a socially connected experience, even if it's one that can't be seen by everybody. The second that I'd add is that once you have competition, you have to have portability. People should be able to take their social media account, their profile, their information, their things that they've posted that they want to keep, the kind of connections they have, and move them from one platform to the next. That interoperability, I know, is a major challenge, and my colleagues who are more technologically sophisticated than I am have pointed out there are privacy issues that need to be navigated. What exactly is the thing that's portable? How do you own your data are all major questions. But I think that there's reason to think that if we actually were able to move platform to platform, then we wouldn't be beholden to platforms if they made these major changes. We could just go to another one that was better. The last one that I'd add is I think I've really come around to the idea that we need to have access to basically a basic social media functionality, short messaging service that is free and accessible to everybody and not based on us being sold and our data sold to advertisers. I believe that I've been making jokes with some people over on the BKC as my ideas have been germinating, that what I'm looking for is short message service, which is texting, Facebook functionality circa 2012, and something like Reddit, which allows for posting and sharing information amongst communities. And I believe that those three things could be part of a basic social media infrastructure that's free and accessible to all Americans without commercial content, without advertising, without anything. And I think if we were as a country to accept that those were goals and values in the same way that we think it's valuable for people to have access to a telephone and a mail address, like a physical address, then I think we can make a big difference in people's well-being.
My final question is, do you have any thoughts on the podcast medium? Do you think listening to podcasts can satisfy the need to belong?
I have found that the podcast has taken off just amazing, right? I mean, I used to, I was an NPR listener for a very long time when I has to drive longer distances in places where I commuted a lot more. I certainly understand the value of listening to other people tell stories and share experiences and learning news. And I just had no idea the podcast was going to get as big as it has been. I think that probably a podcast is, a good use of time. You learn a lot of things. You get to meet new people. You get to hear some interesting voices and perspectives that you might not hear. Whether it actually in itself promotes well-being and happiness, well, I guess we'll find out.
As I reflect on my initial question about whether social media use can increase loneliness, it becomes clear that the issue is highly complex and that there is no simple answer. The rise of social media did not create the loneliness epidemic. That preceded it. There are many examples pointing to both beneficial and harmful impacts of social media, but averaged out, the association between social media and loneliness is weak. Personally, I find that the most helpful way to consider the issue is through the metaphor of social snacking, of social media as junk food. Can it get you that quick sense of connection you're looking for? Yes. Is consuming only social media healthy in the long run? No, in-person social interactions will always be better. But sometimes it's the only option you have. And when you do have other options, just be mindful of how you spend your time. And remember to use social media as a supplement for in-person social interactions, not a replacement. This has been another episode of Frontiers in Health and Happiness, the official podcast of the Lee Kum-Sheung Center for Health and Happiness at the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health. To learn about upcoming events, visit our website, sign up for our mailing list, and follow us on LinkedIn, X, Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook. In the next episode of our Loneliness and Wellbeing series, I'll be speaking about loneliness and health equity with someone very close to home, Dr. Ichiro Kawachi, Professor of Social Epidemiology at the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health. He is truly an expert in his field, having taught at Harvard for more than 30 years, since 1992. Today, for the 5th episode of our Loneliness and Wellbeing series, I'll be speaking with Dr. Ichiro Kawachi. New episodes will air every 2 weeks. Episodes can be found on the Lee Kum-sheung Center for Health and Happiness website and YouTube channel, as well as on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and just about anywhere else podcasts are found. Thank you for listening.